first of all, why would a detective at the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department in 2021 be looking up CEDU at all? A school that closed at Running Springs, at least in 2005.
The short answer is that there are 3 missing persons cases still open, never solved, that occurred on campus. 3 kids, all boys, 93, 94, and 2004. And they've never properly been investigated at all. So a new detective, newly promoted detective named Alicia Rosa, was assigned to the Twin Peaks station, which is the small...
The Twin Peaks station.
Yes, the aptly named Twin Peaks station. In Twin Peaks, it's in the San Bernardino Mountains. It's one of the many small mountain communities that make up that particular area, but it's part of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. So she was basically, what she was doing is she was going through all the missing persons accounts in the region. And then she was kind of shocked to see there was 3 that occurred in the same location, which is rare. So she revived them. It's not like she reopened these cases. Like, they were open. They just were inactive. And then she started looking up CEDU, and she found my article, and she found my work credible. I've done other things besides that article. And she asked me to consult on her investigation. That was November 2021. And not long after, her investigation shut down somehow by her superiors. To date, there's a giant question mark about whether that investigation is even happening. It was taken up by homicide cold case unjustifiably. The detective is not permitted to work these, to assist on her own, cases, essentially. Yeah. There's a lot of questions swirling about how the Twin Peaks station handled or mishandled these cases, and CEDU in general. I mean, the numbers, they knew all the dark doings that were happening, inside CEDU for decades. Basic stuff like, call logs even tell the story of how they flagrantly ignored runaways, AWOLs. I mean, the numbers are extraordinary. The calls they were getting, what I'm saying is, they're getting hundreds and hundreds of calls about runaways, and they were not investigating. They were not searching. They were not doing area checks, just completely washing their hands of anything having to do with this place for a number of reasons.
Yeah. What do you think those reasons are?
Well, I think one has to do with just, CEDU, the area was, sort of a company town. I mean, CEDU employed everyone. The town doctor was also the medical director for CEDU. His wife was, spouses were working in this place. It was
this is exactly how it was at Monarch in the town, in the little town that we were
and
in.
Exactly how it is. When you were in Sandpoint, I mean, it was this, you were in CEDU country. I mean,
that is CEDU country through and through. I mean, they were at one point the biggest employer in Bonner County.
That's right. Yeah. And it was the same thing with, and I think it was like, Lake Arrowhead skiing and CEDU. And that was like, those were your, it was such an economic hub for that particular area. And they were CEDU. Oh man. I mean, I think at a certain point they realized that putting a snake in the mailbox is not going to be successful. You need like a cease and desist. Yeah. So they started really, I mean, they would sue detectives who were not just detectives. They would sue law enforcement officials looking into wrongdoing. They would file complaints against deputies that were getting a little too close. They consider themselves a self-policing institution, CEDU, and they hire their own private detectives, which they called escorts, and largely the the local mountain cops tolerated that.
Yeah.
These are out of state kids. We don't want to get sued by a thuggish, brutal kind of Roy Cohn-esque program that could take us on. And so CEDU just co-opted the town, co-opted everything.
It's funny too, like, for instance, I ran away from Monarch twice, actually. I ran away after about a week there. I ran through the woods, and then I successfully ran about a year later. Um, and I remember thinking, like, well, if I run, when I did run, I was actually caught by staff, but
Mhm.
they called the police, and I'm a 14-year-old kid, and if I told the police, like, hey, I'm at this insane cult, like, they are making us do all this weird shit, like, they're not, my parents sent me here, I don't know what's going on. Uh, what they would do is they wouldn't investigate anything I said. They would just send me right back there.
Yeah, of
And
course.
that's the case with all these places. Like, the police aren't there to, like, you can't call the police. If you are
Yeah.
beaten at one of these programs, there's no way you can call the police. And if you do call the police, no one's going to fucking jail. You know what I mean? Like, you have
Yeah.
you have um less rights in one of these programs than you would in
You have no rights
you have no
in
rights.
prison.
Yeah,
You have zero
you
rights.
said
Yeah.
yeah. Actually, I can't really think
You're
of a
stripped of
single
all
one
your
you
personal
have.
rights. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
have a question for you though. Did you get the option of like getting 5150'd? Because usually, if the cops picked you up, in Running Springs,
yeah,
you have a choice. You can go back to this tripped out treatment center that you're struggling to escape from, or you could go to either a juvenile detention center, or you go to the hospital, to get 5150 treatment. And a lot of kids opted off mountain because you can get access to a payphone.
yeah. No, I was caught by staff, so that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But
But
I
for
would
other
have
kids,
absolutely
yeah.
chosen 5150. Are you crazy? Yeah.
Yeah,
If
right.
you're ever
Better
in a
food.
situation like that, choose the second location, motherfucker. Do not
Yeah.
go back
Yeah.
to the original location, because
Yeah.
the future is unwritten. So you could who knows? Maybe you can escape from the nut house.
Yeah.
But no, it's funny, like, the relationship that the police have with these programs is so opposite from the relationship that the police initially both had with CEDU and had with Synanon, in that
Yeah.
they were really, like, there'd be these raids, they'd come down on them.
Yeah.
And then at the end, by the 1990s, I mean, they were essentially functioning as, like, ancillary employees in some cases. And like you
Yeah.
said, yeah, like, they were very litigious. You mentioned there's this one sheriff's deputy, Charles Wyatt,
Yeah.
and you post his logs here too. And I mean, some of these are sort of astounding. I mean, 220 on this. In 2004, Charles Wyatt was investigating a rape he believed occurred, but received no cooperation from the CEDU staff. Two CEDU staff
Yeah.
members told Charles Wyatt that CEDU was not required to make reports to CPS or law enforcement, and they disagreed with mandatory reporting requirements.
Yeah. Those were depositions that were taken for Daniel Ewan's case. So that they occurred after CD was closed. And Wyatt ended up, he's deceased, but he ended up a crime reporter. He had left the sheriff's department, and he was writing for the Mountain News. He's also responsible for bringing in a DOJ consultant in 2009 to investigate the possibility of a serial killer, James Lee Crummell, and the other two
Yeah.
missing kids, which I think was very misguided and has had a kind of a negative impact on wanting to investigate these cases.
Well, let's
properly.
talk about these kids really quickly.
Sure.
There's like you said, there's three of them. Two from the 90s, John Inman and Blake Pursley.
Yeah.
And then from 2004, Daniel Yoon.
Yeah.
And so can you I mean, runaways are pretty common. Or splittees are pretty common at these kind of places. It's a sort of natural reaction. You get taken to somewhere that's you think is insane, and if you're a sane person, you want to leave there.
Yeah.
And most of the time, kids are caught by somebody in some capacity, and again, like you said, either returned there, or returned, sometimes very rarely returned home. Most of the time, returned to the facility.
Yeah.
But in these 3 cases, none of these kids were ever found. And like you said, the cases were still open. I mean, can you tell us the circumstances of these kids disappearing?
Yeah, I mean, John Inman is the most mysterious. He just, and there's a lot of what I should say before I even start talking about this is that there's nothing but conflicting accounts here on all of them,
Yeah.
and
Wilderness
many
of mirrors.
discrepancies, and nothing adds up. And
Yeah.
especially with Daniel Ewan's case, I mean, I'm writing a follow up now about it, and I've been helping his parents coming up on 5 years, and nothing makes sense. There's like maybe a line or two in a deposition.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, well that's possible, and then everything else is just kind of fantasy. And that's a strategy too. One of the agreements at CEDU, which we have it's an archived like rule book essentially, and one of them is no snitching.
Yeah.
So it's the code of the streets, is how they describe it there. Is no snitching.
Mm-hmm.
So,
by the way, that's no snitching outside. You snitch
to be clear. Snitch inside. Yes,
you have to snitch inside.
That's yes. It was the code of the streets. Don't snitch to outsiders.
Yeah.
So I can't really tell you. I know that all 3 disappeared under mysterious circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
John Inman, he claimed he was just, from the little we know, he wanted to get out and he ran.
Yeah.
Blake Pursley had severe developmental disabilities and a leg length discrepancy, and walked with a limp and couldn't run, and yet somehow he outran adult staffers and disappeared into the night. Yet at the same time, from what I was told from an eyewitness, he was at the middle school. Middle school kids were always monitored. So he was just en route from one building to another, and then he disappeared, this kid. Daniel Ewan, you ask me anything, I have no idea. The missing persons report that we just obtained, interestingly enough, the deputy, who was clearly a little bored, identified Daniel Ewan as suspect number 1, and the reporting party, a counselor, and his suspicious story, he's labeled a victim. So if that tells you anything about, if it sums up the relationship between the mountain cops and CEDU, I think that's it. It's like the person who possibly lied to law enforcement is a victim, and the kid who's trying to escape institutional child abuse is a suspect number 1.
Yeah, the title of your piece is "Are Police Stifling the Investigation into 3 Teens Who Vanished from a Controversial Residential Treatment Facility?"
Yeah.
And I hate the I mean, I
didn't come up with that title.
No, I don't mean I hate it. I'm saying, I mean, I think it's, the core, the crux of your piece is pretty obvious, which is yes, at almost every turn, from not just, the in the immediate aftermath of their disappearance and the just immediate reporting, which, we could talk about how long it took for any of that to actually happen in each of the cases, but then through the years following, and then, afterwards, as reinvestigations or the cases were allegedly tried to be kind of reopened up, right?
Yeah. I've never consulted on a police investigation before. Mm-hmm. I try to avoid police.
Yeah, me too.
I'm an old Chicago punk rocker. I'm not, they're not my friends. Yeah. So I did it. I happen to like Alicia Rosa, the detective. I find her passion and her enthusiasm just such a stark difference between everything I've encountered with police in these cases.
Well, it's sometimes it's such a we talked about this before, but when you have, even as an adult, when you have another adult being like, oh my God, that's insane. You're like, it's a very validating thing to hear from an adult, especially someone in a position of authority.
Absolutely. It was the first time all this work, all the repercussions that went along with this work, the cost of it, the emotional cost, the health cost, all of it felt worth it consulting on this investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And then to see it fall apart, to get shut down. And then to see, Daniel Ewan's parents hopeful again and then just crushed again by an impenetrable amateurish sheriff's department. I'm still reeling from it. I don't. None of it makes any sense to me, and at the same time, it really kind of does make sense. Just knowing that you have a police department that just cannot, for whatever reason, admit its errors. And in order to solve these cases, the sheriff's department has to admit its own wrongdoing and its limitations and its endless failures with CEDU. So you have an institution that, I mean, it's just huge sheriff's department, and all they want to do is they want to ensure their reputation is as intact as possible. You can't do it in these cases. So you got to bury them. And where do you bury them? You bury them in the homicide department, where they're absolutely, I mean, there's no evidence that these are even homicides. Why are they there?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my next question there is, why are they in the homicide department?
Because that's where you can bury a case. That's where you can make it cold. There's a huge difference between a cold case and an open case.
Yeah.
You can make it cold by claiming there's a lack of evidence. You could put it in a drawer. You can give it an H number, which means it's blocked. From my understanding, it's blocked from outside divisions working on it, and that's it. And there you go. So you can take it from a missing persons detective and lock it away in an elite unit that's always overworked anyway. You can make sure that it's not prioritized, and you can call it a day. And that's where we're at now with these 3 CEDU cases. So, unless people are vocal enough and the pressure is so overwhelming, they're going to get away with it, and they are so far. And I'm saying this not as some sort of conspiratorial guy, just kind of rip my hair out here. I'm speaking as someone who was asked to assist in an investigation and then watch that investigation completely collapse.
Well, that's what's sort of so astounding about it is that, 2 of these cases are from 1993 and 1994.
Right.
2021 is when you start consulting on it.
Yep.
And obviously, I mean, from what you seem to describe, this detective, noticed that these 3 kids disappeared from the same place. She's looking into it. She is bringing in outside consultants to actually help and really do a proper job on this for the first time.
Yeah, she had TrueAnon approved. She got approval for an outside agency that is reputable to do this, not just some guy,
And then it's yanked from her and then shunted off to a drawer where it cannot be worked on.
Yeah.
And then she's forbidden from speaking to the press and speaking to you, even as a person.
That's right. And admonished for requesting the cases back when it became clear they were not being prioritized. She asked for them back. And, I was just texting with her a couple of days ago because I wanted, the missing persons report that we got for Daniel Ewan. I wanted to know how much was redacted versus, what she saw. And, she had to remind me, she doesndon't have this stuff. It's just, it was all her files are now in a different, they're down the mountain. So, I don't really know.
At the end of the day, what we're talking about here is not it's 3 missing. I mean, in some cases for 3 decades missing.
Yeah.
Missing kids, possibly dead, very possibly dead. That there's just was absolutely, I mean, that is just it's sort of extraordinary to think about that. 3 very possible deaths, and however that might have occurred or, missing whatever, from a single place, just totally not looked on. And you mentioned earlier the call logs to the sheriff's department. I mean, there's almost 1,000 calls about CEDU, like you
And,
said,
whoa,
from like
that's in 8 years. That's
exactly.
I mean, they won't even give up the ones before 97.
I know, and something else you mentioned in the article is like, yeah, there's 1,000 calls from 97 to 2005, and before that, the sheriff's department is claiming that they have no records due to a system switch.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, software upgrade. Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand what would happen. So all the records are gone.
I think
so if you committed a crime,
it's because they keep all their records in an iPhone, and they just
they
just
like
got lost.
Yeah,
got lost in the cloud. That's right. Yeah, they can't get it.
I mean, it's
bullshit.
sort of,
by the way, I mean, it's all bullshit because when I was consulting on the case, I'm looking at reports from earlier than 97. So why can't you say this is public information?
I mean, I guess just from my perspective, like, there is a quote conspiracy going on here. And I'm not saying it's like a conspiracy where like children are being abducted and, their adrenochrome is being taken out or whatever. No, it's like there's a group of people who at the very least want to cover up the fact that they essentially bungled any sort of investigation